Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask any one of the presenters? Go ahead, sir.
I would like to hear from Micah. You said you train people how to talk to people in situations. Is there any chance you can give us a little bit of that tonight, or does it take a lot of time to do that, or?
Do your one-week program in 2 minutes.
Well, one thing I would say, you should go talk to Rebecca afterwards, because she took our crash course. So she should, and she's from around here, so she should be able to tell you a lot.
Excellent.
So I will quickly tell you, so if someone brings up a difficult situation, let's say poverty, we always say that you need to use three steps to bridge from the difficult circumstance to what the preborn are. Because we want to be talking about what the preborn are, because if they're human beings like you and me, then they have human rights as well. So let's say that someone says to you, well, what about poverty? As my classmates often said when I was in social work at the university, what about poverty? Well, first I use common ground, because if we have common ground, we could agree on more things, right? People's defenses go down. So I would say, I completely agree with you that it would be very difficult to be pregnant and poor, and to wake up every morning wondering whether or not you can feed your child. Then you use an analogy. Imagine that I'm not talking about a pregnant woman, but a woman with a newborn child, and she too is poor. And in her desperation, not knowing how to feed her child, she thinks that the solution to solving her poverty is to kill her child. Do you think that she should be able to do that? What are people going to say to you? No, of course not. Well, we agree. I don't think so either. Now, my follow-up question is, if you can't kill a newborn child because his mother is poor, why can you kill a preborn child because his mother is poor? That's how we bridge from any difficult circumstance to what the preborn are. So common ground, analogy, question. And the analogy is to show that we don't kill born people for those reasons. If we can agree on that, we should also be able to agree that we don't kill the preborn for those reasons. But what's someone going to say to you next? But it's different because they're not human. They're not alive, right? Well, Andre just taught you how they are human beings, right? And so, but I would say that the most important thing, I would say, is to ask questions. Because if you're trying to basically push information into people, they're likely going to reject that. But draw that out of them, right? Because there are things that people already know. And just apply that information to things they already tell you, the things you can agree on, to the preborn. They agree with you that humans have human rights. They agree with you can't kill people in order to solve difficult circumstances. Well, then we just need to establish that the preborn are human beings like you and me.
I got a comment.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
One of the things that struck me the most here, if I could ask somebody on the street, or we're talking about preborn and abortion, did you know that Canada, North Korea, and China are the only three countries that don't recognize the rights of preborn? I don't think many people knew that. I think that's a pretty darn good start.
Thank you, sir. It's been one of our messages right from the very beginning. We launched this campaign in the spring of 2012. And if anything of our talking points, we have three main talking points. You'll find them in the brochures that you all received. That is one that has stuck the most. And it has woken up the most people and actually motivated many people in what we would call the mushy middle, who would consider themselves pro-choice. But when we're compared with those two countries in regards to this, I mean, Canada views itself as having a very high standard when it comes to human rights. But here we sit with these two countries. So yes, thanks for noticing that, and please tell as many people as you can. I think there was one. Nikki had? Okay, so Nikki is telling me that the questionnaires that I talked about, where the parties stand and then the various questions to ask your candidate, she's at the back door ready to give it to you when you leave here this evening. I think there was one fellow behind here.
It's just a thought came to my mind, like the sign behind you, like excellent. Why can't it be on billboards across Canada?
Yeah, they do cost money, but I do want to assure you that there have been dozens and dozens of billboards put up right on Patterson signs, southern Alberta is covered with them. We've had them up and down the Trans-Canada and the Fraser Valley where I live between Vancouver and Chilliwack. Ontario has put up a whole variety of them, and in fact, some jurisdictions where it's expensive to put it up on a Patterson sign, they've decided to erect it just on private property. Well, some bylaws won't allow for that. So they've become ingenious, and they've actually put the billboard on old tractor-trailer boxes. And it's a mobile billboard, so then the bylaws don't apply. So yeah, we encourage that, and if you're interested, we have all the graphics available for that. For 1:2 ratio, 1:4 ratio, and it's all free of charge. I think in the front here, and then we'll go to the middle. Go ahead.
Yes, I heard there's something under, like, Obama passed a law for the preborn in the U.S., so what is the law that passed in the U.S.?
As far as I know, this week Congress voted down a law that would ban abortion after 20 weeks. So it was not actually passed in Congress, it was voted down in Congress, unfortunately.
Because there's more regulations in the state.
There's far more regulations, yes. We sometimes get that question, why is the United States not included because of Roe v. Wade? The reality is in the United States, each individual state has jurisdiction not only over health, but also over criminal law. So many states have passed laws prohibiting abortion after certain stages, implementing mandatory ultrasounds, informed consent, parental consent, many different regulations in the states that have had incredible influence. I think last year was the first year, Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the first year that the United States, more percentage of people said they were pro-life, identified with that, than pro-choice. So it's definitely a sign, again, that the culture is changing. One in the back here, and then we'll go to you, sir. Sister?
I often hear when it comes to election time, we talk to our candidates, well, life issue is not the only issue that we have in Canada. I consider it a priority myself, but how do you bring that to your neighbor who doesn't think that life issue is a priority? Poverty, economics, social situation, you know, take priority. How do you?
I think that you can be unapologetic about the fact that it is a priority for you. And if a candidate came to my door and I brought up this issue, and he or she said, well, you know, there's other issues, I would say, with all due respect, ma'am or sir, my neighbors are probably talking to you about a whole variety of issues. This is what I'm talking to you about. And I want you to act, because it's deplorable that Canada, China, and North Korea are on the same level in regards to preborn human rights. It's outrageous that we allow abortion based on gender, etc., going into those same talking points. So I think there is a lot of the responsibility lies on us insofar as how do we bring up this conversation in the political realm? How do we bring it up with our politicians? We have to ask ourselves, are we demanding things of them that they can't possibly do because of some of those obstacles I talked about earlier? Or are we going to talk with them about things that are very conceivable and, as we showed from the graphs, have the support of the majority of Canadians?
If I could add to that, I would say that how we treat the most vulnerable, it's not actually me, it's Gandhi who said it, I'm just copying him. I'm not even Hindu. But he said how we treat the most vulnerable in our society is a measure of how we are doing as a culture. So the fact that we as a Canadian culture are killing our most vulnerable members, that says something about our culture, and that should force it to become a priority for our leaders and for our culture. And so it's when a politician doesn't understand the gravity of what abortion actually is, as Mike has described it for us tonight. When they understand what it is, then perhaps they might understand why it should be a priority. When we fix the blood that's on our hands, we can start fixing some of the other social problems, I think.
Can I just make a quick point?
Sure.
Improving the economy, creating jobs, and saving children from abortion are not exclusive. The government works on several different fronts every single day. They work on health, security, all these other things. There's no reason why saving children from abortion can't be right up with all these other things.
I think there was a question on the side here. Go ahead, sir.
So I'd like to give a little bit of preamble first, if I may. I will keep this short. So I have some art training, and one thing I know in art is one form that is very effective is to pique someone's curiosity. In other words, not to give them all the information so that they have to ask a question. So I guess a lot of us would know about the exposure of Planned Parenthood and what happened recently, and then the Republican debate the next night. So I thought, I wonder what would happen if we started producing T-shirts that said, "Are you proud of Planned Parenthood now?" So I'm leaving that as a suggestion that in Canada, where a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know what Planned Parenthood is, all of a sudden they see a lot of people with this shirt, they have to ask. Then we get to tell them this is really what it's all about. Now this is, you go down this road, this is the end result. You know, human beings can be destroyed in this way, they can certainly be sold and bartered off. And of course we all know that even the Democratic Party now is backpedaling, the Democratic Party of the United States is backpedaling like crazy. So, you know, I know about the cost of T-shirts, I produce them for my business. If this sounds like a good idea for you, I'd be happy to write you a check.
Thank you very much, sir. We can certainly talk later. Messaging it's an art, and how do we message things so that it is effective, not only an effective use of money, but so that it does exactly what you say. So certainly we can have a discussion afterwards and talk about this. Thank you. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was wondering about the idea of a right to an abortion, because I was wondering if this is Supreme Court said about that, just because I know, like in New Brunswick, one of the big things when they struck down the two-doctor rule was the idea that they have a right to an abortion, they just need the access to an abortion, and that was often what they chanted. So I was just wondering what the Supreme Court said about a right to an abortion.
Okay, did everybody hear the question? So Rebecca's asking about this right to an abortion that women have. And she referenced New Brunswick here when New Brunswick, the new government changed the regulation. I think it was Regulation 420. They changed that, and many women were out in the streets demanding that their right to an abortion is respected by access to abortion. Well, I think it is a myth that the Supreme Court in 1988, Andre talked about it, I mentioned it, that they gave Canadian women a right to an abortion. They struck the law down on Section 7 grounds, saying it violated the right to security of a person. But in their ruling, and then this permeates the entire judgment, all the justices spoke to it, that Parliament still has a duty to enact laws that protect the rights of the fetus. Some of them said at some point, some of them left that up to Parliament to decide, but they were very clear in leaving the door wide open. They did not give women a right to abortion. They struck the law down on constitutional grounds and then threw the ball back to Parliament and said, you deal with it, you're the law-making body in our country, make a law that protects the state's interest in the fetus at some point. So this is another myth that we need to expose in our conversations when people are saying to us, yeah, but this was settled a long time ago. Canadian women have a right to abortion. That's simply not the case. And again, you'll find that talking point in the brochure that we handed out when you came in here this evening. In the back there. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I couldn't Google it, but I'm sure that Prince Edward Island does not do abortions.
You are correct. They pay for abortions to occur in other provinces. Yeah. That's correct. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So James in the back has one. If anybody else has one. Okay, go ahead, James.
I'm just curious, in case that ever comes up, in law, the preborn child is not recognized as a person. And obviously, the people that are sitting in the courts and the lawyers and so forth are fairly intelligent human beings. I'm interested in, can you explain to us what their rationale is for looking at, something that's growing, that's obviously human. I mean, they know all these facts as we do as well. What was their reasoning for coming to the conclusion that it's not a person? In case we encounter it in somebody else.
I told Andre that all the hard questions he gets, so.
Okay, so the way the courts figured it was by staying away from asking the question, what is a preborn child? So when the law was struck down in 1988, they weren't asking about the preborn child, they were simply asking about women's access to abortion, and in particular whether or not they had the access to a criminal charge, a criminal defense in the criminal code, right? So you have to understand, it's a little technical, stay with me here. The criminal code says abortion is illegal. It used to say this, it's illegal unless you qualify for this defense to the criminal charge of abortion. That defense is made when you found a committee of 3 doctors and so on and so forth. And so the Supreme Court, on very technical legal grounds, said, well, that condition, that access to that criminal defense to a criminal charge, that is unequally accessible to women across this country. So they struck down that criminal defense being too restrictive. So it's very technical. They're lost in the clouds there, and they never address the question, what is the preborn child? And you know, I think in fairness to the court at that moment, I think it was Parliament's job anyway to be addressing that question. What is the preborn child? And they should have studied it right away. And I think scientists across the spectrum, doctors, philosophers, ethicists, religious leaders, and anyone with a bit of common sense would have said, we know what the preborn child is, it's a baby. We could have gone from there. They never did. So then later on in 1997, when I showed you the quote from the Supreme Court where they said that the law of Canada does not recognize the unborn child as a legal person possessing rights. That case is actually a very, very sad case. It was a case coming out of Winnipeg where there was a woman who was sniffing glue and gasoline. She was addicted to that. And she had a number of children already. She had 3 children, 2 of whom had mental disabilities because of that addiction. She was now pregnant with her 4th child, and she was still sniffing glue. And so Child and Family Services said, we're going to take the woman, the mother, we're going to put her in protective custody for the duration of her pregnancy, which was another 4 months or so, to keep her from sniffing glue in order to protect the fetus, her child. And that was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, the fetus doesn't exist. It's not a legal entity. The law doesn't recognize it. Therefore, you can't hold the mother if there's nothing there, even though there was something there. There was a child there. And so they ruled there, again, they ignored what the science says about the preborn child, and they simply ruled on the non-existence of law that you can't hold the woman in order to protect her non-existent child. It's a horrific history of law where we're being intentionally blind to what is real.
So there's no actual law that says that the unborn child, the preborn child, is not a person. What there is recognition that there is no law saying that it is.
No, not because you have section 223, right?
Yeah.
So that's a positive law. It says you become a human being when you have, a child becomes a human being when he or she has fully exited the mother's womb.
For purposes.
So
what was the thought process that led to that positive statement that the preborn child is not a human being?
Okay, so that one also, we'll make this the last question. Or not.
this is what happens when you give it to Andre. It's like you ask a hard question, you get a very hard and deep answer here as well.
Sorry, I'll try to keep it quick. So that law, section 223, is very, very old. It goes way back to the original criminal code. Back before we had ultrasounds, back before we had these video images of the preborn child. And so it's based in earlier time, back when we thought women were pregnant or knew women were pregnant with a child when that child was felt kicking, right? When I said the quick with child kicking. And so that section 223(1), with that historical background, what it's saying is, for the purposes of the criminal code, we're going to pretend, it's called a legal fiction, if you want the technical term, we're going to pretend that the child only becomes human afterwards, and so every other section in the criminal code that deals with homicide, that deals with assault, and so on and so forth, we're going to suggest that the rest of the criminal code kicks in full force, in equal force, once that child is born. And that's never been updated. But they had those abortion provisions there, so they still, at least back in the day, at least they still protected the preborn child through the abortion provisions. They just didn't protect them in the same way, they didn't recognize them in the same equal way that they would recognize a born human being, which is, in the times, understandable. That was never updated when they struck down that law, and so we're still living with this archaic law. And one MP tried to change that in 2012. MP Stephen Woodworth, the Kitchener-Waterloo area member of Parliament, and he put forward a motion in the House of Commons 2012 saying, we need to revisit Section 223 and examine it in light of science as to whether or not we should ever say that some human beings are not persons. And that motion was voted down by about a 2/3 vote. So about 92 or so MPs voted for it, but another almost 200 voted against it. So we have a lot of work to do on that front.
So basically, one of the thoughts was that it was ignorant and creating legal fiction, and it solved the pragmatic problems of the time, because at that time it was an abortion law.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got a question for you. So those guys there that didn't decide to do that, the fiction law, are those guys, when the truth comes out, and everybody agrees to the truth, are those guys able to be getting charged for murder?
Parliament has parliamentary immunity. So the fact that they passed bad laws before, they have immunity over that. It's a sacred doctrine of parliamentary systems. So that's also why any member of Parliament, if he says something that's rebellious inside the House of Commons, he can never be sued for libel or slander or defamation or anything like that, because there's total immunity within that House. It's a respect for the parliamentary system. So I don't think so. But, I mean, by the time we get there, perhaps they might have moved on.
A short answer would be we have no law. Very, thank you. We have no laws. That's right.
Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of a question, comment. For years, groups like Campaign Life and others have been sending out questionnaires to candidates in each election. Where do you stand on this, on the life issues? At first they would answer, but then the parties started to enforce some discipline upon them. Now, all the parties are enforcing discipline. It's very difficult to get questions, so we have to go by their voting records. Now, we live over in Fundy Royal. We know the voting record of the incumbent MP, and we can wholeheartedly vote for him. I don't know what it's like in this riding or other ridings here. We know the enforcement by Trudeau and the NDP that they will not allow pro-life candidates. The Conservatives don't stop them, but what's the difference when you have a Prime Minister who refuses to allow even his backbenchers to really bring anything forward? Stephen Harper years ago used to say he was pro-life. He used to call himself a Christian. And it was always nudge, nudge, wink, wink, work hard for us, do a lot of campaigning for us, and when we get a majority Conservative government, we're going to do something for you. Well, we've had a majority Conservative government, and not much has happened. So where are we politically with going forward on this sort of thing?
I'll give you my opinion on this. There's no factual answer to this. My opinion is that we're in a transition period politically in regards to protecting preborn human rights. And the reason is because for decades it has been shrill voices that have dominated the debate. So this is shrill voices from either side, the hard pro-life and the hard pro-choice. So hard pro-choice, 5% of Canadians who believe that women ought to have that right for any reason at all throughout the entire pregnancy. And on the other side, we are part of only a 5 to 8% of the Canadian population who believe that all human life ought to be protected. We are trying now, and more Canadians are accepting that we need to start the conversation somewhere in the middle. Like Micah mentioned, what do we have in common? And then how do we move out from there? So by talking about things that we have in common, like we're all against sex-selective abortion. During the time when we worked with Mark Warwell, we were working with feminist groups who we would link arms with. Right now, preborn victims of crime, the families that have been touched, would self-identify as pro-choice. But they want to see this law enacted. Because we're not starting the conversation by saying, we want a perfect law and preferably tomorrow. We're recognizing that we live in a pluralistic society, and it's not a Christian country anymore. We are not a Judeo-Christian country. We're a secular nation. How, as Christians then, do we act prudently in the political sphere to protect our preborn neighbors? And we feel that we are proposing a solution to that. And more Canadians are there welcoming that conversation. When I go to Ottawa and speak with MPs, they love the fact that I'm not coming in there saying, we need a law that bans all abortions. How are we going to get that? They just throw up their arms and say, we can't do that right now. But when I come in and say, listen, late-term abortion, a ban against that is supported by 77% of Canadians. How can we work towards a goal that would ban late-term abortions and then move on from there? Then they're much more willing to discuss. So we're in a period of transition that might take a change in leadership. Stephen Harper won't be the Prime Minister forever, so I would encourage you to continue engaging in the political arena. Continue asking those questions of your candidates and of whoever gets elected as your MP, because they need to know that this is an issue that is living in their community. Yeah, we will be around for at least an hour afterwards, so feel free to come up to us. You guys are welcome to take a seat if you would like. I would like to end with a few notes here. In a little while, we are going to be having a collection this evening. The funds from this collection will go to support the We Need a Law campaign. So you might want to know a little bit more about how we are operated and what our financial needs are. We Need a Law is a campaign, as I said earlier, of the Association for Reform Political Action. ARPA Canada is a non-profit organization with a national board that oversees our work very carefully. ARPA Canada is not a charity because Canada Revenue Agency would not allow us to do this kind of work and have charitable status at the same time. That means that we can't give a tax receipt for donations. It also means that we don't get donations from churches, charities, or foundations. In other words, we are funded entirely by people like yourself who believe this is important and want to see it continue. ARPA's annual budget is a little over $700,000. This includes $208,000, which goes directly to the We Need a Law campaign. In total, ARPA Canada employs 9 staff, 4 of whom are full-time or part-time, involved with the We Need a Law campaign. We have offices in 5 locations, including a central office in Ottawa, just blocks away from Parliament Hill. If God has given you the financial means, we respectfully ask you to support this work by making a donation this evening. Or you can do it by taking home the prepaid envelope that you received when you came in here earlier on this evening. Your support doesn't just allow us to do this work, it can also give us the means to grow this work so that the cause of preborn human rights is therefore magnified. There are 4 ways this evening that you can give. Check, cash, monthly donation form, and a credit card. And I would like to emphasize that monthly donations are by far the best way to contribute to this campaign. It provides us stability. You know exactly how much you're giving each month, and it can be as little as $5 to $10 a month. Many, many people have contributed in that way, and that allows us to continue this mission and continue to expand. We're now going to play a brief message. This is from ARPA Canada's director. It's a video message. He cannot be here with us this evening. About 3 or 4 minutes into the video, we're going to pass a bag around and collect the envelopes that you've put your donations in.
Wonderful people who came out to this Life Tour presentation. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join the Life Tour because my wife and I were blessed with new life of our own just recently. Mike, Andre, and the other speakers have made the case that this election is the time to speak up for preborn human life. But this election also matters a great deal for born human life. Allow me to explain. Now, some of you may know, earlier this year, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down Canada's assisted suicide law. They gave Parliament just 12 months to come up with a new law. And if we don't get a solid new law, Canada will not just be infamous worldwide for the way we treat the preborn, will also be one of the most permissive regimes in the world when it comes to the killing of the elderly, disabled, and other vulnerable people. Now is the time to take action to prevent this from happening while we still can. We only have a few months left. ARPA's been working hard to encourage this government to do everything it can to continue to prohibit all euthanasia. And that includes drafting and sending a policy report to all MPs and senators, which you can find on the back table. Be sure to pick up a copy for your neighbors as well. Our efforts also include lobbying MPs and the Minister of Justice, even drafting a sample law that would allow Parliament to continue to prohibit all euthanasia. But they likely won't do that unless we, the public, make it a priority. And that only happens when we take action. I'm asking you to do 3 things to fight against the legalization of assisted suicide while we still can. Number 1, be a witness in your communities. You can be that witness by making use of one of these attractive vehicle decals. Sends a loud and clear message that Canada should be caring, not killing. We should be promoting palliative care, not euthanasia. You'll find these decals on the back counter as well. Second, and more important, on your chair or the back counter, you'll find this interactive card that we've produced, which explains the important point that as soon as Canada crosses that line, where some people are allowed to kill others, it's impossible for that line not to continue to shift so that more and more people die. We'd like every one of you to take one of these cards and do 2 things. First, use it as a teaching tool to educate your family, your friends, neighbors, coworkers, classmates. And second, put a personal message on the back of that slider insert. Put that insert into the card and then into an envelope. Send it to the new Member of Parliament. You'll find simple instructions and the MP's address on the back of that card. Pop it in the mail, and keep in mind you don't need a stamp because postage to Parliament is free. So this will be one of the first messages your new MP will get when they arrive in the House of Commons. Now third and most important, please set aside just 30 minutes to take part in an important government consultation. You see, the government's formed a special panel to consult with experts and us, the general public, about what kind of law should be made. Now, if you go to arpacanada.ca, you'll find a link to that consultation, as well as an entire article we've drafted that walks you through the survey. Now, if you say you wish you could do something to stop euthanasia, this is the answer. Do something. Fill in that survey. So in summary, please spread the word by making use of these decals. Take one of these cards and share it with your neighbor, and then your Member of Parliament. And then finally set aside half an hour to take part in the government consultation for a new law. Now, of course, keep all these matters in prayer, as only God can change hearts. Now, regardless of what happens, we have no reason to be alarmed or afraid. God will continue to watch over this land. We must keep our focus on being the example of the kind of neighborly love that Christ exemplifies. And if our society grows darker, the light of love will only shine brighter. Thank you for taking the time to come out to Life Tour. We look forward to seeing many lights shining across this land.
So it's obviously a very pertinent and relevant issue in Canada today. So we're thankful to Mark that he has put that together for us. I simply want to conclude by, on behalf of We Need a Law and the presenters this evening, thanking you wholeheartedly for coming out. Again, be encouraged that you can be part of the movement that is making a difference in our country. We will be available for some time afterwards for questions or interaction, if you will. Looks like there's some refreshments as well. Again, thank you on behalf of We Need a Law.